Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Emily, and this is my channel, Books for Life. So today I'm here to talk to you about my 5 favorite books since starting BookTube. I know a lot of people are doing their favorite books of 2018, and to be honest with you, I don't remember a lot of the books that I read before I started because I wasn't really keeping track of them. So I thought that instead I would talk to you about the 5 books that I have just absolutely loved since starting BookTube. I started my BookTube channel in July, so this is about 6 months worth of books, and I have 5 top books and then I have 1 honorable mention. And what's really interesting about this, at least to me, is that 3 of them are YA fantasy novels, which is like my jam. Like that's where I typically read. But then the other 3, including the honorable mention, is an adult novel, and they're adult historical fiction or just adult fiction. And I don't typically read adult novels, so I find it really interesting that of all of the books that I read, that 3 of them happen to be adult. And if I have a link to any of these books with reviews, I will leave it above so you can go check out those. I'm not going to give you a ton of detail as to what I thought and why and what it was about, because I have spoken about these in a lot of my wrap-ups and or I have specific reviews. That was a long enough intro, so I'm going to start this by talking about my honorable mention. And my honorable mention is an audiobook that I listened to in November, and that is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I absolutely loved this audiobook. I had like 6 hours left on the day that it was due back to the library, and I found anything I could do to give me more time to read this or to listen to it, because I did not want it going back to the library and I did not want to have to wait to finish it. I loved the storyline. It was touching. It was heartbreaking. About a main character, her name is Eleanor, and her life is fine. She does the same thing every day. She does the same thing every weekend, and she is just existing. And so I think this book really talks about like the difference between existing and living, and what does that mean, and the importance of relationships in your life, whether it is familial relationships or friendships. So I loved the story. Her life ends up changing when she is with a guy from work, an IT guy, and they're leaving the building, and they go by this older man who has like fallen in the street, and they end up helping him, and they get an ambulance for him, and he goes to the hospital, and they end up like paying him visits and things like that. And so that's kind of what like has upset the course of her life, and then the story goes from there. And it was just a very touching story. It was beautifully written. It was compelling. I gave this one a 5 out of 5. So I'm going to now talk about my top 5. I do not have them ranked in any specific order. I'm going to talk about my 3 YA fantasy novels first, so I'll leave a timestamp down below for when I start talking about my adult ones, so if you're more interested in just one or the other, you could just listen to those ones. So the first YA fantasy novel that I absolutely loved was Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I absolutely loved this book. I devoured it. I thought it was an amazing fantasy novel. I am like dying for the next one to come out because it left on such an amazing cliffhanger. I love the world building. I'm hoping she will continue to do more world building as we move, through the series. I loved the main character, Zelie. I loved, just the overall concept. I just thought this was a really well thought out fantasy novel. I didn't necessarily love the romantic aspects in this book, but aside from that, I loved everything else. I loved the characters, and I thought this was a really great premise, and I really enjoyed it. I talk a little bit more about this in my July wrap-up, so I'll leave a link above, but this was an outstanding YA fantasy novel for 2018. The next one on my list is actually a trilogy, and I know that's cheating, but it's not cheating, it's okay. So I listened to Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor this year. I don't know how I missed the series when it came out. I loved it. I loved Karoo. I loved, this world within our world. I loved learning about the Chimera. I loved everything about it. This is by far one of my favorite fantasy worlds of all time. I want to read like the novella that's based off that, or it's like a companion novel based off that, something like that I just learned about. I loved it. I thought this idea of Chimera was really, really interesting. I loved like the forbidden love that was in it. I loved how much Zeus was like there for Karoo, even with like how outrageous Karoo's life was. Zeus was always there, so I loved the friendship there. It was such a strong, friendship, such a strong bond for each other, and it was amazing. So I listened to all 3 of these audiobooks during the month of October, and I devoured them. So I have a wrap-up video of all the audiobooks I listened to in September, October, so you can check out more of the backstory in that video, but this was definitely one of my favorite trilogies. I love this. It was the first time I ever read Laini Taylor, so I have Strange the Dreamer on my shelf, and I can't wait to learn a little bit more about her writing and her worlds, and I'm excited to dive into that one. Big surprise, but the last YA fantasy novel that I absolutely loved in 2018 would be Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. I just love this book. I knew I would. I was really, hesitant to pick it up because I didn't want this world to end. I wasn't ready to say goodbye to these characters. I wasn't ready to see, who would and would not make it to the end. I did not want that. So I did not start that until really December. And then in December, I hammered it all out, all 1,000 pages of it. And I just loved it. 5 out of 5. This brings me into the adult books that I read and loved since I started BookTube. And the first one would be Rust and Stardust by T. Greenwood. I have an entire video where I talk about this. I end up actually in tears because this book moved me so much. I absolutely loved this story. It is a historical fiction story. It is based on this young girl who is kidnapped in the 40s and her journey, and the way T. Greenwood just writes it, it's beautiful. It is, my gosh, and I sobbed so many times during this. I just ugly cried. It was such an amazing novel. It captured me. I didn't want to put this down. Check out my video all about it, explains it more, but that is 5 out of 5 for me. And the last one was Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate, and I just listened to this one in December, so you can check out my December and November audiobook wrap up for a little bit more information. But this is another historical fiction novel. So this novel takes place during 2 different time periods. One is the 1940s and then the other is present day. And so each chapter goes back and forth between each of these storylines. And so in 1940s, there is a family, the Foss family, who's the mom of the family is giving birth, and the delivery goes bad. And so the dad needs to take the mom to the hospital, and he leaves 12-year-old Rill Foss in charge. In the morning, these men come and take Rill and her siblings, the 4 siblings, away. They are brought to the Tennessee Children's Home Society, which is an orphanage, and this orphanage actually existed in real life. It was run by a woman named Georgia Tann, and she was basically stealing poor families' children and then selling them to rich parents. She did this with thousands of children. Many children actually died because the conditions in the orphanages were just terrible. This was another heart-wrenching novel. And so you follow Rill and her siblings' story. And then you go to present day, where you are following this young woman. She is late 20s, maybe early 30s. And she is the daughter of a senator. And she is going to a political event at a nursing home. And so she ends up meeting this old woman who has a picture of somebody who looks very, very similar to her grandma. And she's not sure if it is her grandmother when her grandmother was young or just somebody else that looks similar. And so she begins investigating and learns a little bit more about this woman who's in the nursing home. And so each chapter goes back and forth, and it is utterly amazing. It is beautifully written. It is compelling. It had me hooked. I didn't want to stop listening. It was just truly a fantastic novel. So all of these books I gave 5 out of 5 stars. I loved absolutely all of them. Like I said before, I find it really interesting that some of them were YA fantasy and then the other ones were adult fiction. I think this is telling me that I need to read more adult fiction this year. So thank you so much for watching. What were some of your favorite reads? Did we have any of the same? Have you read any of these? Any of the ones that I mentioned, and what did you think about them? So leave a comment below, and I'd love to chat with you more. Please give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe, and I'll be back with more bookish videos soon. Keep reading!